What is the best philosophy that, if followed, would make someone's life go best or as best as possible for that individual? What philosophy or theory comes the closest, at least, to helping one live the good life, as philosophers call it? The answer, or at least the best answer I have at the time of recording this video, is something I'm calling Metasatisfactionism. First, I'll go over how I arrived at this concept, then I'll go over what it is, and at the end, feel free to give me feedback on it, including if you think it's just flat out wrong. Now, as a friendly reminder, well-being is most commonly used in philosophy to describe what is non-instrumentally or ultimately good for a person. It essentially means how well a person's life is going for that person, not just their state of health, like you probably normally hear the term being used. Also, well-being is a kind of value, a good-making property. When we're contemplating what things make one's life go best, it's not just the specific thing like water, but how it's intrinsically good or bad for a person. For example, water flooding our house, quenching our thirst, etc. The philosopher Derek Parfit, who we owe much of how we talk about theories of human well-being, believed all theories of well-being fall into three categories: hedonistic theories, desire satisfaction theories, and objective list theories. Now, if you want a more detailed video about each of these, make sure to check out the link in the description. I'll link to those videos below. Hedonistic and desire satisfaction theories of well-being are subjective in nature, meaning only we get to decide what's best for our lives. On the other hand, objective list theories of well-being state that there are particular things objectively good or bad for a person, whether they have any pro or con attitude toward them. Different objective list theorists have their own specific list of what they think is objectively good for all of us, as there's no one agreed upon ultimate list at this time. Now, for example, an objective list philosopher such as the humanistic psychologist Abraham Maslow would say something like human connection is an objectively good thing for everyone. If I live like a hermit with zero human contact, if I want a better life, I ought to make a friend, whether I have the desire to do so or not. Parfit believed the best answer to a life well lived is some combination of these philosophies, but he didn't have a final answer. There have been attempts to combine these theories, and I've looked at a bunch of them, but they all seem to be illogical. So that's why I came up with this theory, which I'm calling Metasatisfactionism, which states that in a body that objectively responds positively or negatively to certain experiences, one's life goes best if it contains more experiences of the kind that one subjectively desires and are discernible. This philosophy is basically like the preference hedonism Parfit described, a subjective theory of well-being, but it takes metaphysics into account or understanding of how a nature and the human mind function in the 21st century. I think Derek Parfit was on the right track with preference hedonism. It's just the idea he put forth wasn't comprehensive enough, and it didn't really consider metaphysics. Now, science has shown most people are wired to respond to certain experiences the same way. If we all put our hand on a hot stove, every living person is going to scream in pain. But that doesn't mean that avoiding touching stoves is an objective truth or an objective good that we all ought to obtain. Saying that one's life goes best if we all avoid touching hot stoves isn't logical. So in the case of living like a hermit, a preference hedonist would say that the answer to a life well lived is to do whatever you have a preference for in the moment. If you don't want to seek out a meaningful relationship right now, you don't have to. An objective list theorist may argue, if they believe human connection is an objective good, science shows all people in the world are wired for human connection. Evidence-backed studies show that those in extreme isolation are worse off, and there's empirical evidence that feel-good chemicals like oxytocin release when interacting with other people. Obtaining human connection is an objective good, and you ought to try to make a friend, even if the previous attempts were unsuccessful. Metasatisfactionism, however, states that yes, we're wired for human connection, and in most cases, being with other people will make one's life better. But in the end, only you get to decide what's best. We all agree that human connection makes one's life go better, but that doesn't make it an objective truth that one must obtain to guarantee a better life lived. Here we're not violating what philosopher David Hume dubbed the is-ought problem, a problem of logic and philosophy that states that just because something is a certain way in the world doesn't mean that we ought to do something about it. He believed people move too readily from empirical observations of facts to judgments. So in the end, I believe the best theory of well-being, or at least at this time, is a subjective one, yet still takes into account an objective world. And how do we know what we're wired to want? Well, science, a tool within philosophy, not something that dictates what is right and wrong, can help us, and is currently helping us figure that out. Okay, so at this point, if you don't fully understand what I'm getting at, let's run Metasatisfactionism through a philosophical thought experiment that theoretically proved subjective theories of well-being wrong, called The Experience Machine by Robert Nozick. Now, I know that I've been over this before if you've watched any previous videos of mine. Still, if you're unfamiliar, Nozick asked us if there was a machine called the Experience Machine, something you could plug your brain into that would simulate the happiest reality possible for you, and you wouldn't remember that you plugged into it. Would you plug into it? This is like the Matrix, where you're living like a blob hooked up to a computer simulator. Now, according to a theory of well-being that's subjective, like preference hedonism, you may want to, since you get to experience more happy chemicals like dopamine, oxytocin, and happy feelings during your life. But Nozick says none of us would really hook up to the machine if given a chance. We want to do and achieve certain things, he writes, instead of just experience them. We want to live our real lives and be a certain kind of person instead of a blob of matter connected to a device. This suggests that meaning-making or living in reality is an objective good, and objectiveless theory is the superior theory of well-being. But the preference hedonist can argue back that what makes someone's life go well could actually make it go bad. Who exactly is determining what a good life is in this case? It certainly seems like an outside expert, or Nozick himself, determines for someone entering the machine that they will be living a bad life. But what if entering the machine made this individual's life better? Perhaps this person was really suffering in the real world and will continue to suffer there. Nozick is not referencing that person's mental state, something only they can do. Nozick would say that the individual in the machine is experiencing an unexperienced harm of not having real meaning, even though they mentally feel great in the machine. But just like you can theoretically have unexperienced harms to your life and feel good, you can have unexperienced benefits but feel your life is terrible. Does having unexperienced benefits make one's life go well, even if you feel depressed or you were tricked into thinking your life is bad? Well, that individual certainly would disagree. So it's not logically sound to say entering the experience machine is an objective good that we all have to obtain. But would a best theory of life allow someone's teenage son who had a bad day at school to connect themselves to the experience machine for the rest of their life and live like a blob because someone, said something mean about them? Well, of course not. And that's where Derek Parfit sort of left off, not entirely convinced of a single theory of well-being. But I think the metasatisfactionism idea marries these two ideas without violating any logic. Science shows that authentic meaning and living a life without false desires are good for almost everyone, or everyone living today. To argue against this is to argue against evidence-based studies, and is pretty much irrational. Still, knowing this, it's not an objective truth that we each have to follow and get. We each get to make our own subjective decisions for what's best in our life in a world that points to experiences that, when obtained, would most likely make our lives better. Okay, so there's a lot more that I can dive into concerning this idea and theories of well-being in general and living the good life, if anyone cares. If you do, just comment below and I can talk more about it. And remember, this is just a little YouTube video, a brief outline of a potential solution to the problem of well-being. This isn't a dissertation for my PhD. And there's a lot more to, of course, be said and dove into. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. That helps it rank in the algorithm over the clickbait content out there. And subscribe for more videos like this using the link in the description. And turn on the notification bell to receive updates when the new videos come out. So again, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in another video coming up.